April 19th, 1995. A quiet Wednesday morning in the heart of America. Children were being dropped off at daycare. Office workers clocked in for another routine day. And the city of Oklahoma went about its morning rhythm, unaware that, in just moments, the landscape of their city and the nation's sense of security would change forever. At exactly 9:02 a.m., a thunderous explosion shattered downtown Oklahoma City. The blast was so powerful it registered as a 3.2 magnitude earthquake. Within seconds, a massive column of smoke and dust rose into the sky. Where once stood the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, now stood chaos, destruction, and death. The explosion tore through the 9-story structure, obliterating its north face. Cars burned in the streets. Windows shattered across a 16-block radius, and cries for help echoed through the rubble. In the chaos, emergency responders rushed in, unsure of what had just happened: a gas leak, a plane crash, or something much worse. When the dust began to settle, the truth emerged. This was no accident. It was an act of terror, the deadliest domestic terror attack in United States history. 168 people lost their lives that morning: men, women, and children. Among them were office workers, military personnel, and 19 innocent children at the building's daycare center. More than 680 others were injured. Oklahoma City, a place once known for its friendly, small-town warmth, became the scene of national mourning. The youngest victim was just 4 months old. Parents who had kissed their children goodbye that morning never saw them again. Rescue workers, digging through unstable debris, uncovered toys, tiny shoes, and pieces of lives cut short in an instant. The attack shocked America, not only for its scale, but because the threat came from within. This wasn't the work of a foreign enemy. The perpetrator was one of their own. To understand how it happened, we must go back to the anger and paranoia brewing in the minds of a small group of anti-government extremists in the early 1990s. The central figure was Timothy McVeigh. Born in upstate New York in 1968, McVeigh grew up quiet, intelligent, and fascinated by guns and military life. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1988 and served with distinction during the Gulf War. But after returning home, something inside him changed. Disillusioned by what he saw as government corruption and overreach, McVeigh became obsessed with the idea that the U.S. government was turning against its citizens. He devoured books like The Turner Diaries, a violent, anti-government novel that fantasized about a white supremacist revolution against federal authorities. 2 real-life events pushed him over the edge: the 1992 Ruby Ridge standoff, where federal agents killed the wife and son of white separatist Randy Weaver, and the 1993 Waco siege, where 76 members of a religious sect died after a confrontation with the FBI and ATF. To McVeigh, these were signs of tyranny. In his mind, the government had declared war on its own people, and he was ready to fight back. In late 1994, McVeigh began plotting his revenge. He teamed up with an old Army friend, Nichols, who shared his anti-government beliefs. The two set out to create a bomb capable of destroying a federal building. They settled on the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. McVeigh chose it because it housed multiple federal agencies, including the ATF, the very agency involved in Waco. It also had a daycare center on the 2nd floor, though McVeigh would later claim he didn't know that. Over several months, McVeigh and Nichols gathered materials. They bought 4,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, 1,200 pounds of liquid nitromethane, and hundreds of pounds of fuel. Using stolen explosives manuals and diagrams, they built a massive bomb inside a rented Ryder truck. McVeigh meticulously calculated every detail, from the placement of the barrels to the parking position that would inflict maximum destruction. On the morning of April 19, 1995, exactly 2 years after the Waco siege, McVeigh drove the yellow Ryder truck into downtown Oklahoma City. At 8:57 a.m., security cameras captured him parking in front of the Murrah building. Inside, workers were just starting their day. At 9 a.m., he lit the fuse. 2 minutes later, he stepped out, locked the door, and walked away. At 9:02 a.m., the truck exploded. The blast was catastrophic. A crater 8 feet deep and 30 feet wide gaped where the truck once stood. Half the Murrah building was gone. The force of the explosion was equivalent to nearly 5,000 pounds of TNT. Within minutes, first responders flooded the area. Firefighters, police, and volunteers dug through the debris with bare hands. Paramedics treated survivors in makeshift triage zones. The smell of smoke and burnt plastic filled the air. A firefighter who arrived early described the silence after the explosion as the loudest quiet you could ever imagine. Then came the cries, faint voices trapped beneath the rubble, calling for help. Over the next 48 hours, rescue crews worked around the clock. Some found survivors clinging to life. Others uncovered scenes too heartbreaking to describe. Images of the devastation dominated television screens worldwide. The photo of firefighter Chris Fields carrying the lifeless body of a baby girl, 1-year-old Bailey Allman, became the defining image of the tragedy. Even as the rescue continued, investigators began piecing together what had happened. The FBI quickly determined the explosion came from a massive truck bomb, likely homemade. Agents sifted through the rubble and found a piece of the truck's rear axle, still bearing part of its identification number. That clue led them to a Ryder truck rental agency in Junction City, Kansas. The renter had signed the paperwork under the name Robert D. Kling, but witnesses described him as a young, clean-cut man wearing a baseball cap. Not Kling, but someone else. Meanwhile, less than 90 minutes after the explosion, an Oklahoma state trooper pulled over a man driving without a license plate near Perry, Oklahoma. The driver had a loaded gun and gave his name as Timothy McVeigh. He was arrested for the weapon violation, a routine stop that, within hours, became the key to solving the nation's worst bombing. When the FBI connected McVeigh to the Ryder truck rental, the pieces fell into place. His fingerprints matched those on receipts for bomb materials, and witnesses identified him from photographs. Within days, the FBI raided the home of Terry Nichols, discovering more explosives and bomb-making components. Nichols soon surrendered. McVeigh's motive was chillingly simple: revenge against the U.S. government. In his eyes, the bombing was payback for Waco and Ruby Ridge, and a call to arms for others who shared his extremist ideology. In interviews before his execution, McVeigh expressed no remorse. He called the bombing a legitimate act of war and described the victims as collateral damage. To him, the government's actions justified his own. The trial of Timothy McVeigh began in 1997, 2 years after the bombing. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, eyewitness accounts, receipts, forensic matches, and his own admissions. The jury deliberated for less than 24 hours before finding him guilty on all counts, including 168 counts of murder. On June 11, 2001, McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at a federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. Terry Nichols received life in prison without the possibility of parole. But for the victims' families, justice brought little peace. The memories of that morning, the loss, the trauma, the unanswered questions never faded. The bombing stunned the American public. For decades, the U.S. had viewed terrorism as something that came from abroad, distant, foreign threats. The idea that one of their own citizens, a decorated Army veteran, could commit such an atrocity shook the nation to its core. Oklahoma City became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. People from across the country poured in to help. Construction workers, doctors, psychologists, even strangers offering food and shelter. The community's unity became a beacon of hope amid darkness. President Bill Clinton addressed the nation, calling it an attack on our children, our way of life, and our future. Memorials sprang up across Oklahoma. Flowers, letters, and teddy bears covered the fences surrounding the ruins. Eventually, that ground became sacred space, now home to the Oklahoma City National Memorial, where 168 empty chairs stand in silent remembrance, one for each life lost. Despite the convictions, questions lingered. Did McVeigh and Nichols really act alone? Several witnesses reported seeing a John Doe No. 2 a second man with McVeigh in the days leading up to the bombing. The FBI launched an extensive search, releasing composite sketches, but no second suspect was ever identified. Some theorized that shadowy militia members or foreign groups may have helped behind the scenes, though no solid evidence has ever surfaced. Others pointed to inconsistencies in the timeline and missing surveillance footage, fueling decades of conspiracy theories. To this day, debates continue over whether the full truth of the Oklahoma City bombing has ever been told. The Oklahoma City bombing marked a turning point in American history. It exposed the rise of homegrown extremism, the dangerous belief that violence could be justified in the name of patriotism. In the years since, the attack has served as both a warning and a lesson. Federal buildings across the nation were redesigned with enhanced security. The term domestic terrorism entered the public vocabulary, and for countless Americans, the image of the destroyed Murrah Building remains seared into memory. Every year, on April 19th, families gather at the memorial's reflecting pool. They read the names of the victims, light candles, and remember those who never came home. But even amid remembrance, one haunting question lingers. How does someone born into the same country, under the same flag, come to see his own people as the enemy? Perhaps that's what makes the Oklahoma City bombing so chilling, not just the scale of destruction, but the reminder of how hate can grow quietly right next door. It started with anger. It ended with 168 lives gone and a nation forever changed. And in the silence of that empty field, where 168 chairs now stand, one thought endures. A whisper from the past reminding us what's at stake when fear turns to fury, and when one man decides that his grievance is worth a city's pain. Because in the end, the Oklahoma City bombing wasn't just an attack on a building. It was an attack on the very idea of who we are. A reminder that sometimes, the greatest threats come not from outside our borders but from within. This is Crimes Unknown, where cold cases refuse to stay buried. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more haunting mysteries. And don't forget to like the video to support real crime stories that deserve to be heard. Drop your theories in the comments.